Got to introduce my man, Jud. He is an architect, educator, Jud Kline, FAIA, NCARB lead AP out of Ohio. Say what's up, Jud.
Hi, Garfield. Thank you for having me
Of
here. What a great introduction. I appreciate it. Thanks.
course, Jud is an architect, educator, elected official, and organizer, organizational leader. He's president of CBTAD Services LLC, serving communities with design and development services, implement their vision. Previously a partner and senior VP of Hirschman Architects for 37 years. Judge, you were doing your thing. He has published several articles and spoken at state, regional, national AIA, and other organizations. And of course, you would expect it. He's an Eagle Scout. So, Jud, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That'll save me at least one slide here in this presentation. What I'm going to talk about today is meaning and monumentality and how architecture can play a role as a restorative mechanism in the community. Architecture provides us a platform in which we can explore social issues in many different ways. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and then engage you all in an activity at the second half of this program to get your creative juices flowing and start to get you to think about the impact of the built environment on social issues. So we're going to explore the application of architectural design to promote community renewal. And I'll skip this because Garfield's done a nice job introducing this. The issue is that we're all facing today is that our cities have been disrupted by a wave of senseless violence that's dividing those communities. So how might we consider the question of healing of the community through the design of a place or element that could challenge our thinking and engage our emotions to be better and resilient? Communities need to have the way forward, and architecture can provide that mechanism. Architecture can be the resource that we all use. So the challenge that we're going to talk about here is through the application and understanding of meaning and monumentality. And by that, what I'm suggesting is that very often we create monuments to reference a situation, a condition, an issue that has taken place, but they don't come with meaning and they don't necessarily come with a way of engagement. So how might we consider the development of a place or object that could have an effect on the audience to begin to rekindle a spirit of understanding and tolerance by educating those encountering this intervention to become more open and thoughtful in dealing with the issue? We want to challenge people's thinking, create new perspectives, to create a recognition of what their particular place in this conversation may mean and may do. So the process that we're going to talk about here is developing a meaningful approach has several steps, and we're going to go through some of those today. The first is identifying keywords and addressing the issue. Well, y'all just did a little exercise in that Garfield led to talk about what you thought the big picture is. What is social justice and racial equity? What are might be the words that refer to that? We're going to look at precedents. And by precedents, I mean things that have been done in other places and other locations to recognize a particular condition, situation, or issue, to make them relevant to the people who would encounter them. And the most important thing that we can think about is never forget. We cannot heal until we recognize what's happened and what led to its happening, and then recognize what we need to do about it and how we need to change. And creating places for that is really important. We then look to discuss or charrette a session to share our ideas. And a charrette is an architectural and planning term where people come together and talk about the issue and raise ideas. It's where, and somebody said, one of the people said that all ideas matter. This is where those ideas come together. That's where those ideas that matter get expressed. We then develop a statement of purpose for the experience. The great movie director and producer Francis Ford Coppola, who is the director for movies such as the Godfather series, Apocalypse Now, quite a few other major films. In the process of designing his films, he began by creating a single word that sort of reduced everything down to the idea, the big idea, the guiding principle for his project. So that when he came to the fork in the road, that principle or guiding idea would tell him which way to go, left or right. And so we want to think about what that guiding principle might be and how that may influence what we do. We then may create a collage of photos defining the design's character. And we'll look at something later that my students did, about 10 years ago, following the Tamir Rice shooting here in Cleveland. And we looked at, that's where this program originally came about. Considering the sites where the project should be established, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because place is important. Then designing the concepts. What are the ideas that we think might contribute to the outcome that we want? And most important, solicit feedback on those concepts to refine the solutions, to get the aha moment that we need to have in order to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then we finally generate a presentation package to deliver the project so people can understand it. Graphics are important. They help us tell our story. They help us deliver the message that we want to deliver, and we help people to engage it and embrace it, because it's really difficult sometimes to imagine an idea without having a visual to go with it. So identifying keywords and addressing the issue is a critical starting point for addressing social issues in a physical form. And we begin by developing a wordle, which is a graphic organization of words to produce a visual summary that describes the response to that issue. And it begins to tell us where the words are more important and where the words are less important, and what those words might be and how do they fit together and create sort of a pattern. And then we identify the overarching organizing design element that describes the basic concept, which as architects, we describe it as the partie, which is, again, the Francis Ford Coppola idea, the big idea, the guiding principle for the design, what it is that will create the form that we want to be represented by this pinnings of an idea, the words that contribute to that idea. And then we're going to look at the words that may help us better understand the outcome that we want to see. So I'm going to take you through a couple precedents that I think explain and explore the idea of how do we express through architecture the experience that we want to share with people, that we want to bring them to. I really appreciate, well, first of all, I'm going to tell you this is the Oklahoma City bombing memorial, the Murrah, Albert P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City that was blown up by domestic terrorists. 168 people were killed in that bombing. 19 of them were children in a preschool and a daycare center. And the community wanted to find a way to memorialize these people to remember. One of the things that's really important in this idea, if we're going to say never again, and we always say that, never again should we see this situation, we really have to understand what led up to and created and contributed to this circumstance that led to this situation. And so they created this memorial to the people that died in that terrible explosion. And there are three elements that make it up. We have on the upper left is a image of the park that was created with a reflecting pool. Important to think and reflect upon what took place and why it took place. The little boxes that you see in the lower left that are illuminated at night, and those represent each person that was killed in that horrible day. And then a monument, an archway, if you will, that makes the statement about what this is representing and lists all of the people that were killed as a result of it. What's really important to think about is changing perspective, creating new points of view that we can understand and change our own way of thinking and get to that aha moment that suggests to us where we ought to be, not where we are. One of the AIA presidents a number of years ago said in a speech, we want to build our preferred future. And we build our preferred future by understanding what it is that our preferences are all about. This is the Wounded Knee Memorial in Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Probably many of you don't know the story of the Wounded Knee massacre that took place in South Dakota. I'll briefly share with you that story. In 1890, the U.S. cavalry was bringing in all of the Lakota Indians to bring them back to the reservation and to disarm them from the potential for an uprising. And this was several years after Custer was killed in Little Bighorn. And the cavalry came in and they were disarming this natives, the Native Americans in their community, and a gun went off. And subsequently, nearly 300 people were killed. Native Americans were killed, women, children, older people, and so on. It was a horrific massacre that took place in this community. They built a monument that you can see here on the left, a stone that marked the place where all of these people perished. And they've created this little entryway that you see in the middle that describes how you get to it. It's in the middle of South Dakota. Not a lot of people get there. Subsequently, they built this memorial that you see on the right, the Wounded Knee Memorial, which is actually the story. It tells the story of what happened and how it happened. And the party, if you will, the big idea is this native drum, and the form that they created to represent it was this form. So you begin to think about form. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, many of you, hopefully anybody have seen it, raise your hand. To me, it's one of the most moving memorials that I've ever encountered. It was created by architect Maya Lind. It is a very simple statement. It's located on the mall in Washington, D.C., not far away from the Washington Monument. You can see behind it, and the Lincoln Memorial, which is just to the left of it. It depicts the growing number of folks that passed away, that were killed in the Vietnam conflict and the Vietnam War. And it goes from the beginning with one or two names to the middle where there's thousands of names. Over 50,000 Americans lost their lives in that conflict, and their names are all engraved on these black granite panels. And you enter it from the either one side or the other, and people are talking and engaging one another. And as you work your way down into it, you become much more quiet and much more introspective, because you begin to feel the magnitude of what happened and the loss of these lives. And many people come here year in and year out to find their relatives and friends that passed away here in that war, and they create etchings of their names, and they bring them home. This is the 9/11 Memorial in New York City. It was created to heal the nation, our national psyche, over this horrific event that took place on September 11th in New York City, where the twin World Trade Center's towers were taken out by two aircraft flying into them. And the initial move was a very simple move to memorialize it with these two beams of light, these two giant searchlights that penetrate the sky and represent the two buildings that were torn down. They become sort of ghost-like in their appearance, but they're there to remind us. Memorials should do a couple things. Number one, they're there as a reminder. They're there as an educator. They're there as an incitement to action, that we need to be vigilant and thoughtful about the things that we do. This is Yad Vashem in Israel. That is the Holocaust memorial in Israel that recognizes the 6 million Jews that died during the Holocaust, but it also recognizes the millions of other people that died in that same. There were millions of other people that died during the Holocaust that weren't Jewish. They came from gypsies, and they came from minority groups and all kinds of others that were going to be summarily removed from the planet. And so this celebrates their lives and recognizes their as people, and reminds us the idea of never again to bring about this to happen. And if we don't learn the lessons of history, we are going to repeat them. And so meaning and monumentality helps contribute to that. And of course, we wouldn't be complete without the Martin Luther King Memorial in Washington, D.C. that was there, is put there to engage a race and all of our people to better understand one another. And as you go around the memorial, you see snippets of many of Martin Luther King's speeches that were influential and thoughtful. The idea is to change perspective. It's to give us that different viewpoint that's really important for people to understand their own perspectives and how they need to change to go from here to there. Transformation is the bottom line. How do we transform who we are to what we want and should be? And these facilities that we can create as designers, as architects, as people can help contribute to doing that. So to begin the charretting process, we want to share our ideas. All ideas matter. You guys just said that. I can't think of anything better to say about this. Dialogue is an important part of the process. It begins for the designers to explore thoughts, and not just their thoughts, but the thoughts of others, to bring together as many voices as possible. One of them, and I'm going to digress here a minute, one of the motivations for me to be involved in this process of educational outreach, and I've been doing this, working with students in minority communities for 26 years, doing programs, starting programs, and being a major contributor to programs for kids, is to recognize the importance that all voices matter. If we're going to solve the real big issues of our time, and believe me, and you know this, the big issues are homelessness, housing, food shortages, jobs, education, economy, sustainability, all of these kinds of issues. We need all voices. We can't just have one group of voices and they know all the answers and they're going to share their wisdom, and everybody else is going to know from that. We need everybody's voice. We need to hear from all perspectives and all points of view to come up with a solution to the problem that we are presented with. We need the community stakeholders. We need to hear from the people that are there in the community that have been directly affected by what took place and what is taking place. How do we gain their input? Some of the most beautiful things that I have seen over the last summer has been the implementation of murals to help tell the story, to help create the ongoing conversation that needs to happen relative to this important question about social justice and racial equity. We need to gain understanding and perspective on the role a project can play in the community. How might it be the catalyst for something to happen? That's really important, being the catalyst. And a catalyst is essentially it's a chemistry term. It's an element that you put into something that in itself isn't changed, but changes everything else. It causes change. And we need to look for catalysts that enable us to make change. And you have the opportunity to do that. You are the future. You are the folks that will come to the table and influence the change that we want to see. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in others. We want to share ideas and thoughts about the condition, the events, and the direction for the solution. What happened here? Why is it important? What about it do we need to learn? And how might we learn it? This is where consensus on the direction and intentions for the project are built. This is where we come together and we identify that nugget that needs to be extracted and celebrated and produced. So we need to develop a statement of purpose for the experience that we want people to have. So framing the question is essential to the development of a design response. Very often, as designers, we're sent on a mission to go design a building or a project or a place. And the direction is design a plaza for this something. But that's not the real question. The real question is, what is it that that plaza is intended to do? And why is it intended to do it? So we have to recognize that question. My daughter, who is a scientist, refers to something as the 5 levels of why. You first ask the first question, why did something occur? And once you answer that, well, why did that happen? And why did that happen? And why did that happen? Until you get down to the atomic level of what something is. And then you can build off that atom and create a new thing. What is the raison d'etre, which is a French word that means the reason for existence for this monument? Why are we doing it? Why do we need to have it? What will it tell us? What will it help us do? Remember, some monuments are not necessarily things. They can just be a place for reflection. An essential step to complete in driving the design and shaping the response is the creation of a design statement to shape and give intention to the direction of the project. Design is the first signal of human intent. It's where we begin to think about why we're doing something and what it should be. And we do that in this creation of this statement about our project and about what we want to investigate. So where do we go with this? Based upon the design statement, the designers often look for images of objects, places, experiences to illustrate aspects of the concept. We cobble together disparate images and then from those extract what we might do. In producing reference images, creating a collage of photos obtained from the internet or magazines, along with brief statements, we'll begin to design the character of our design response. It creates this image that we can put in our heads that we can then produce into a project. So I mentioned earlier about the importance of the site for the project's location. Identifying the site where the place or monument will be located contributes to understanding the response. We have to recognize the site that we want to choose, and that's maybe part of the process. Even if it's the site where the issue took place, if it was a shooting or a killing or some other horrific event, where in that location is the right place for this thing to be placed? It's often in the place where the event occurred. However, it doesn't need to be there. It could be somewhere people congregate. Remember what I said about the Wounded Knee Memorial? It's out in the middle of South Dakota. And if we want to express the concern and plight for Native Americans and their history, are more people going to see it in South Dakota, or might somewhere else be a better place to put it? where others will see it and learn to engage with it. And we need to think about what that might be, because that's going to influence our thinking in the process. A statement in location other than the site of the event, particularly where the event occurred in a remote location or where it has a broader impact, just then marking the place can be a source for education and engagement. Education and engagement is the bottom line. I think somebody said it here. How do we increase awareness and access? We do that through education and engagement. How do we engage people? This last summer, as Garfield mentioned earlier briefly, I'm a city councilman in the community where I live in Northeast Ohio. Last summer, following the events of the summer that dealt with the issues of social justice and racial equity, myself and one of my colleagues on our council crafted a community statement, a piece of legislation for our community as to how we might go forward and understand our role in social justice and racial equity. How might we conduct ourselves as a community? What do we represent? We produced an ethical statement for our community that was passed as a resolution back in July. And one of the important components to it that I added as an amendment was the notion that we really need action. We need something actionable. This statement was a sort of a beautiful piece of prose. It was a great platform from which to launch to the next level, but it didn't have action associated with it. And in the words of Nelson Mandela, action without a plan, or plan without action, is a dream. Action without a plan is a waste of time, but action with a plan can change the world. And I wanted to change the world. So we began to think about how might we create that action plan that would benefit the community and all of those people within it. Fortunately, I live in what is a very diverse community with lots of different makeup to it and lots of different choices. So last Wednesday, this in fact just the other night, we introduced at Council and a proposal for a racial equity and social justice forum for our community that would engage not only our community directly, but 3 other adjacent communities that have indicated interest of participating in it with us. We created a committee to move the forum forward so that we can put this in place. And the hopeful outcome is to develop policies and protocols that will change our communities and those surrounding communities to be better places for people in the region. One of the things, I digressed a little bit on that one. The site also offers clues as to how the place might be developed. The conditions of the site may often dictate what it might look like and how it might be organized. So we follow a design process to get there. And while we won't get through that whole thing, we're going to work on a piece of it today. The design process that I described for my students is something that I call the 12-step program. It begins with defining the problem. What are we really after? What are we trying to do? It then moves on to brainstorming ideas, researching and generating, identifying the restraints and criteria, the things that get in the way, the things that hold us back. Explore possibilities, select an approach, develop a concept, build the model, test and evaluate the design. How do we do that? We ask people to look at it and see what they think. Refine the design, refine the solution, and then communicate and present the results. That being said, input is really critical. So gaining feedback on the design concepts will lead to refining the idea and closing in on a solution that meets the objectives set out to achieve. Through a public process, comments, suggestions, and criticism can be incorporated into the design of the project, leading to the final design. In conclusion, I want to present a little project that was done in our community to celebrate the life of a young man who died in the community. And the designers felt it was important to create a reflecting place, a place where people could come and think about what happened to this young man and what might happen to others. And so they designed this was a student design that was created and built and in the community park, and to celebrate this young man's life and to provide an opportunity for others to think about conditions that affected it. It's a beautiful little park, and it's a kind of a great place to reflect. So that leads us to the next thing. So what we're going to do between now and 11:30 is we're going to work on this word interpretation design challenge. The focus of this exercise is to pursue and consider the development of an architectural response to a social issue. How might we go about responding to something? And we'll give you that direction. In doing so, we begin by creating a list of significant social issues for which design for healing might be considered. So we're going to look at, and we're going to kind of quickly get to this because we could spend the whole session talking about what those issues might be. And I've done this with my students, and that's a whole session in and of itself. So we're going to talk about and look at discrimination and inequality as the focus to investigate, and how we might transform the community through architectural placemaking. I mentioned before, transformation is really, really important. I love movies and stories and books that help transform our thinking. And there are a couple of really great movies that I watch all the time to sort of continually reinforce that potential for transformation. Number one is the movie, to me, Dances with Wolves. And it changes our perspective on Native Americans and how we feel about the Native American community, and put ourselves in that situation and that perspective. And the other one is a movie called by a book by John Grisham called A Time to Kill. It was a movie that starred Matthew McConaughey and Samuel L. Jackson. And it too helps change our perspective on something. At the end of the movie, there's this sort of startling, instantaneous transformation that takes place. And I think that's really important enough for us to think about. So how do we get there? How do we get to that point? So the ideas of discrimination and inequality are the derivative of many other words. Those two are the top of the food chain. What we want to do is drill down and find the underpinnings of that word. What we want to do is look for all the other words that are baked into our psyche and baked into our community that lead to discrimination and inequality. So what I want to do here, and this form shows, is to take a few minutes and create a list that you fill in, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, of those words, those negative words that contribute to this overarching notion of discrimination and inequality. Along with that, there's the good. There's what could we do? Oops, when I get my thing. Okay, there it is. What could we do in finding the good words that may change that direction, where we're headed? So we want to undertake and consider how might we create an object or place that represents one of those words. And what I'm going to ask you to do collectively, and this is the exercise of the day, if you will, is first we're going to create these two word lists. And we'll take 10 minutes, because that shouldn't take you that much time to, think up as many words as you can in that 10 minutes time and write them down. And then we'll ask to share that. Hopefully all of you will raise your hands and we'll hear some of those words. On the one side of the ledger, we'll have the words that contribute to that problem. And then on the other side of the ledger, going to take a few minutes and think about all the words that might contribute to a better outcome, to changing how we might feel about discrimination and inequality. What way might reduce it, eliminate it, change it? So we're going to have these two lists. And then what I'm going to ask you to do each individually is to pick one of those words out of either one of those categories and create a visual of that word, what it represents, what it looks like. And so this is one word that one of my students chose to illustrate, which is the word fear. They felt fear was a component of discrimination and inequality. And they drew this image of a person sitting in a corner, huddled, to represent that image. How might we do that? So it was a very simple drawing that they used to illustrate that thought. So what I want you to do is to either come up with, once we've gone through this word interpretation, this listing of all the words and the selection of the one that you think you'd like to illustrate, is to create that. And it may not be a drawing, an image. It might be a thing that you find that is representative of that word, that really gets to its essence, what it means. And that's where we begin. That's where the process really begins, because we start to get ideas in our head that help us put something on paper. So what I'd like to do, this was put together, oh, there we go. This was put together by my group of students that I worked with 10 years ago. I have to tell you about those two students, two of those students who I'm really, really proud of. I've mentored them since they were in the 9th grade. They did this project in the 9th grade. They are now 23 and 24. One will be graduating with his master's degree in architecture from Carnegie Mellon this May. The other one is a graduate of Kent State University's College of Architecture with his master's degree in architecture. The second one is now working for an architectural firm here in Northeast Ohio, and they are really great young men, and I'm really proud of where they've gone. And they came out of the program that I helped to develop and led at the John Hay High School of Architecture and Design in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. So this is a collage that they created following the shooting of Tamir Rice here in Cleveland. And they talked about discrimination and prejudice and social equity. And on the left, they identified the problem. In the middle, they talked about the transformation. And in the bottom, bottom right, they looked at solutions. How might we take advantage of an opportunity? So while you're thinking about your list of words, which you should be doing right now, I wanted this image to be up on the screen so you can see how that might play into what you're doing.
Hey, Jud.
See Garfield on here?
I'm on there. No, I know we just got a few more minutes to finish up the exercise, but I just want to tell folks that Jud and I are on the member group, the American Institute of Architects, K-12 member group. Jud is actually leading that group. I led it a couple of years ago. And, you know, we have some awesome folks like Jud working with students every day to inspire them, to guide them all around the country in this space. So you're lucky to have Jud on this exercise. Jud, you're doing an awesome job, and let's see what words come back.
Yep. I don't know if you've talked about the book that we've made available for the students here as one of the prizes that you've identified. And I'll talk about it in a minute because I know it so well. The book that we made available is a book called Designing Victory. It's the story that the autobiography of an African-American architect up here in Cleveland who is a good friend of mine, whose name is Robert Madison. Robert is 96 years old. He still practices architecture. I was over at his house on Wednesday, I think, and visited with him. He is an inspiring man, and actually was my sponsor to become a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He has an unbelievably inspiring story and history. But his mantra has always been, and I will share it because we all need to learn from it, and that is, and I guess there are two, but the one that's most important is find a way to make it happen. He has always done that in his life. He's fought a lot of uphill battles and won most of them that I know of, and has been successful in his career as a result. And he's designed and been part of some really important architecture, both here in Northeast Ohio. He was the architect of record for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here in Cleveland, First Energy Stadium, the Browns football stadium here in Cleveland, the formerly, there's the book. Here's the book. And it's an autographed copy of the book with a letter attached to it that Bob has donated for you. It's a great story, and I'm proud to call him both a friend, colleague, and mentor for me. And his story is worth telling and retelling because it's a story of bravery, of commitment, of purpose, and inspiration. So I thought I'd share that.
We had a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, I see that.
And it looks like one of our other members, our participants, answered it. He took a picture of it.
Yeah, looks like it.
Superstar, man.
So,
all right.
Why don't we see what you guys have come up with? So let's begin. Let's go back to the the word interpretive document, and let's see what words you all have come up with on the downside. If you want to raise your hand or jump in, we'd be happy to have you on the screen. And let's talk about the words that are the underpinnings of the sort of the negative side of discrimination and inequity. So let's see. Well, we got a couple words here: generational poverty, educationally challenged, sexism, non-exposure, misunderstanding, misunderstood, normalization, gentrification. That's an interesting word. Is Ben Hutchins on this? Can you expand a little bit about what you were thinking about the word gentrification? What do you mean by that?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, great.
By gentrification, I understand there's a lot of applications for the word, but specifically in the fields of architecture, groups of people who are forced into or forced out of areas that they were welcome in and into areas that they are almost contained in is the general idea. Where they are given a lower quality of life and education and things like that. So it's a very difficult place to get out of. And that serves as one of the main ways to this day, because while it is, technically illegal and there's complex ways that people try and deal with it, it still happens, and it's very difficult thing to stop, sadly.
I think there is a partner word that goes with that may be displacement, that and how that affects. Scared, alone, prejudice, exclusion, righteousness. So let's look at the other side of the ledger. Any thoughts on words that might be appropriate to help counterbalance, the scales of justice, social justice, equity? You need to have something on the other side to counterbalance it. What might some of those words be? I see also subtle and overt. Yeah, great comment, Ben. I think that's a really, now that you explain it, I know it. I understand it clearly. Any thoughts on the other side of the ledger? Inclusion, here we see something. Inclusion, acceptance, communication, important word, cooperation, sharing, creating communities. Those are all good words. I think that communication is a educational awareness, role models, brilliant. We really need to see role models. We really need to see people that look, I don't look like you. I'm sorry, but I feel like you. So, but you need to see people that are role models that look like you. Being a colleague in the true sense. Gary Vance. You snuck one in there, you guy. Okay. Gary, what'd you mean by that one?
Jud, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Gary.
Yeah, Jud, good program, good effort. I think it's the truest acceptance. It's not working with someone because, well, you're told to, or it's the acceptable, or it's the norm. You do it because you value their opinion, you value their collaboration, you value them as a colleague. And I think that's the truest sense.
Thank you for that. Open door access, embracing, mentorship and guidance. I think those are some really, really good words that we have here. These are all great. So what you've done effectively is you've created this scale. On the one hand, you have the downside, the negatives of what are the subordinate issues that relate to this question of discrimination and inequality, poverty, educationally challenged, sexism, non-exposure, being misunderstood, normalization, now that we understand what it means, gentrification, prejudice, and exclusion. There is inclusion, acceptance, communication, and cooperation, really important. Sharing, creating communities, educational awareness, role models, collaboration, collegiality, I'll reduce it down, open door access, embracing, mentorship and guidance, limited opportunities. I think that goes to the negative side. The positive side, unity, peace, willingness to step out of your zone. I like that. Lorinda, do you want to expound on that just a little bit?
Hello, this is Lorinda. Hi, how are you doing?
So can you expand a little bit on that willingness to step out of your zone?
Well, what that really means is your preconceived notions, maybe your stereotype, maybe out of your community, or how you were raised, or, like if you maybe you were raised with segregation, meaning that maybe you don't have non-exposure to other communities or people that are not like you. So when you're willing to step out of your zone, you're opening up yourself, educationally, emotionally, spiritually. So, you have to be willing to understand like other people that are not like you, or don't, may not look like you, maybe have different cultural values.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Yeah, so that's what I mean.
Thank you for explaining
Okay.
that. We have broadening previous limited opportunities. So you have the counterbalance of the limited opportunities to the unlimited potential, unlimited opportunities that people should have to advance themselves and to be successful and accepted within the community. So we've created a wonderful and I think robust list of ideas that now we need to take and think about how we might graphically or physically represent those ideas. And I challenge each one of you to select one of those ideas, one of those words or statements, and create a visual for it. What would that look like? What would it look like for embracing? What would it look like, mentorship and guidance as a singular element? What might, on the other hand, limited opportunities look like? Or, some of the tougher ones are the overt racism tactics. What might that look like if you were to draw or identify a singular image that really demonstrates the meaning of that word? So that begins and creates the fundamental basis for which we would use to create a place where we could come together, a place where we can change perspective, a place where we could, as Linda just talked about, a place where we can step out of our comfort zone and find some new perspective, a new point of view, and learn to understand, embrace, and exalt other people. We are all made in the same image. So how do we celebrate that? And how do we get away from some of the negative things that have come about over time, that one community feels they're more superior than another community or group of people, and that they're entitled to something different as a result of that? How do we change that dynamic, and how might we create places where that could occur? And that's the whole idea behind this notion of meaning and monumentality as it relates to understanding how architecture can be a resource for social justice.